see this for. It's not an instantaneous thing.
Yeah, you have to read it. Right?
Yeah.
So I just have to be clear. I'm thinking to change here. Car plan. This is wrong.
You like that? Don't delay your idea.
Okay, Philip. You're on.
Oh, is it me? Yeah. Already? I think we're done. Okay.
Should we go now? Okay. I went to the interview.
Oh, you went to the
Yeah, I thought it was okay.
The heartbreak. Yeah, I mean, yeah, do you know how many went to interview? Do you know the success rate of interview?
I have no idea. I'm assuming something in the range of 50 to 30.
Even there.
It's not great. The effort.
Okay, let's get going again. Okay, so we talked about the sustainable development goals. We talked about the technology readiness level. So we had a moment going blank. So now we come to another TLA, the RI intensity level, which is actually something which is part of the orbit methodology. So it's an orbit, unlike the other things we've been talking about. It's kind of like an orbit special, if you like. It has a number of different things you might think about. One of them is, what is the impact of what you're working on the Sustainable Development Goals? And as a very kind of high-level way of understanding this, you can think about IP's innovation potential. IP, another acronym that has many different uses, but here we are. IP1, no clear impact in any of the Sustainable Development Goals. It doesn't mean to say it doesn't have any impact on anything. IP2, maybe it has an impact, but not necessarily quantified on one of the Sustainable Development Goals. IP3, impact on 2 or more Sustainable Development Goals. And then if you could quantify it, you shove it up a bit more. So if it's only got one, maybe you think it's IP4, and if it's got an impact on 2 or more, or a very broad application, or it's especially risky, or it's especially potentially transformational, then you give it innovation potential 5. I mean, these are obviously very, very high level. So you have to be a bit inventive in thinking exactly what SDGs that you might have an implication of. So it's always a way of helping to think how important the innovation is going to be, and linking it to these high level Sustainable Development Goals. Okay, so yeah, as I've just said, if you think it's going to be potentially really transformatory and/or potentially highly risky, then give it the highest the innovation potential. So you, in thinking about what the potential for RRI is, you might think about not only what is its TRL, how close is it to actually being something which is out there, but also how big will its impact be? And this is one way of thinking about it, is using this innovation potential. And from these you can work out what we call the RRI intensity level. So it's kind of a rough rule of thumb to give you an idea of how much RRI is kind of important for the project you're working on. So if something which you think is going to be hugely risky or be very important for 2 or more SDGs, and it's quite close to market, then you might think that the RRI intensity level is higher than for something which is not going to have much impact. If it's not going to have much impact, you might wonder why you're doing it in the first place. But imagine it, you can't really identify an impact, and it's just very early stage. Then the RRI intensity level might be sort of correspondingly low. And again, as a rough rule of thumb, you can then use this to think about what kind of RRI actions you should kind of be taking. So again, this is an orbit special. This is the orbit method. It's a way of trying to make it achievable and realistic. So we were talking about what's necessary and what's sufficient of RRI. You just need to be kind of realistic. So we're not saying that everybody should put like the Human Genome Project, 5% of the project for the whole thing. That's obviously got enormous ethical implications. Other projects won't have such important ethical or such clinical implications. So, you know, just being a bit realistic about it. How much of your effort and how much of your time should be put into doing RRI? I spend all of my time doing RRI, but other people, I know they're not necessarily quite so obsessed with it as I am. They just want to get on with doing their work. And so what's a reasonable amount of effort we're putting into things? So it's an attempt to provide a common agreed set of principles that we can go with. And in a minute, I'm also going to talk about the RRI maturity model, which is more to do with how ready you and your organisation are for doing RRI. So there's the RRI intensity level, and there's the RRI maturity model, which is kind of like two sides of the same coin, if you like. One is how much do you need to do. One is how much are you ready to do. Okay, so this is really the RRI maturity model, as I understand it, which is that your organisation at maturity level 1 is completely unaware, has no idea that RRI even exists, hasn't given it any thought. RRI maturity level 2, we call it exploratory reactive. The organisation, a research group, in response to various external pressures, like say the funders says they want it, or there's some press publicity about it or something, starts to think about, respond to outside pressures. Level 3, it's defined. You have within your organisation you do some RRI, you have a definition of some components of RRI, and they're part of your regular R&D business processes. So if you're an organisation, this is the sort of thing you might be doing as part of your business processes. Proactive, getting a little bit, this is a bit more proactive. You actually do it, not just because you have to do it, but because you can see the benefits to the organisation doing it. And finally, what we call the strategic level. It's completely part of your regular process. It's built into the culture of the organisation. It's part of your strategic framework. Every time you think about some new thing to be doing, you think about the RR implications. And there's a paper that describes all of this, which I think I've got some slides I've nicked from by our colleague Ben Stahl and various other people who have been looking particularly about how you incorporate responsible innovation in industry, which I know is a bit far from what some of us are doing, but still, when it gets out there, people in industry are interested in how they can do it. Okay, so here's an example of thinking about the responsible